Unit 9, Lesson 2, Dr. Martin Luther King's Six Principles of Nonviolence. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conflict Resolution and Peacemaking, the class that teaches you how to manage interpersonal conflict and drama for yourself and others. I'm your instructor, David Lowry. Almost everyone has heard about Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and their nonviolent approach to bringing about social change. But not everybody knows about the six principles that Dr. Martin Luther King introduced to active nonviolence. Dr. King's Six Principles of Nonviolence. Though nonviolence may be defined and categorized in many ways, we advocate the approach advanced by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his book, Stride Towards Freedom, The Montgomery Story. His practice of nonviolence includes six fundamental principles that we provide. Number one can resist evil without violence, but this practice takes courage and fortitude. Number two, nonviolence seeks to win friendship and understanding, not to humiliate one's opponents. The goal of nonviolence is not revenge or retribution, but rather redemption and reconciliation. Number three, nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice, not people. The perpetrators of oppression are also victims of the oppressive system and are not evil of themselves. Number four, those committed to nonviolence must be willing to suffer without retribution, and such suffering can be transformative. Unearned suffering is redemptive and has tremendous educational and transformative possibilities. Number five, nonviolence chooses love instead of hate. Nonviolence resists the violence of spirit as well as the body. The nonviolent actor seeks to give love in the sense of the Greek word agape, which is redemptive and without expectation of anything in return. And number six, nonviolence believes that the universe is on the side of justice. The nonviolent resistor must have a deep faith in the future stemming from this conviction. As peacemakers learn of these principles by Martin Luther King, they should notice several essential concepts embedded within that describe the heart of King's active approach to nonviolence. First, we'll look at personal preparation. One of the first requirements for active participation in nonviolent movements is personal preparation, including mental and spiritual development. Few things cause a person more anguish and reactivity than experiencing injustice. For many, the very nature of injustice summons a reflexive action to meet force with force or extreme fear. It takes courage, determination, and training to suppress reflexes while intentionally placing oneself in the path of potential suffering and harm. One must be mentally prepared and consciously aware of the potential for suffering that may lie ahead as one confronts evil and injustice. Another quality necessary to practice nonviolence is dedication. Peacemaking is an activity where people use their skills to try and improve things, which is why we fight against injustice. Peacemakers are not passive people who watch evil things happen without doing something. They are just as active and assertive at confronting injustice as others are at perpetrating injustice. As John Galtung stated many years ago, nonviolence will here be conceived as a style of action, whereby we mean patterns of behavior observable by others. So Martin Luther King led marches and encouraged people to join in the fight against racial inequality. As April Rain eloquently states, King declared that we each examine our role in the battle for civil liberties, justice, and equality. It is not enough to consider ourselves simply as allies in the fight. Instead, we must put our heads down, listen more, and do the work of improving the lives of a marginalized community to which we don't belong. Love in action. When peacemakers participate in protests, marches, demonstrations, or other confronting activities designed to call attention to injustice and unfairness, their actions are not based on collective hatred, nor is there any intent to direct hostility towards specific individuals or groups. Dr. King referred to his nonviolent teachings and campaigns as love in action. It is possible to hate unfair laws without hating those who enforce them. Dr. Martin Luther King describes how he learned to set aside his hatred towards sheriffs, judges, and others who had bombed his home and were instrumental in arresting and jailing protesters. He remembered that these people were also victims of a system that had never taught them better. At the same time, peacemakers are hoping that by their actions, those who must enforce unjust laws will begin refusing to carry them out. Redemptive suffering. Those who practice peacemaking may well suffer all kinds of things, including public misunderstanding and the ill will of many people. At the time of his death, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was less popular than ever. A 1966 Gallup poll found almost two-thirds of Americans had an unfavorable opinion of Dr. King. It was only after his death that the importance of his work and views became more appreciated. Gandhi, the nonviolent leader who led India to its freedom from Great Britain, established what he called the law of suffering, which he described in Young India. In Gandhi's own words, "The conviction has been growing upon me that things of fundamental importance must be purchased with their suffering. Suffering is infinitely more powerful than the law of the judge for converting the opponent and opening his ears, which are otherwise shut to the voice of reason. The appeal of reason is more to the head, but the penetration of the heart comes from suffering. It opens the inner understanding in man. Suffering is the badge of humanity, not the sword." Martin Luther King's beloved community. One of the many reasons Martin Luther King encouraged nonviolence was a concept he called the beloved community. He believed people of all races and economic conditions could live peaceably together in an idyllic world where all would share in the same values and opportunities for growth and advancement. As Herstein notes, the beloved community rotates around two principal axes: agape love and moral laws. Agape love is best described as doing what is best for others, regardless of what they have done to you or how you may feel towards them. King defined agape as purely spontaneous, unmotivated, groundless, and creative. It is the love of God operating in the human heart. King said before the National Council of Churches, "At the center of nonviolence stands the principle of love." Further, King said, "When we rise to love on the agape level, we love men not because we like them, not because of their attitudes and their ways that appeal to us, but we love them because God loves them." Here we rise to the position of loving the person who does the evil deed while hating the deed that the person does. The second dynamic is based upon Brightman's moral laws. King embraced this philosophical approach and found it helpful in his work. According to Brightman, one's moral compass is derived from formal, axiological, and personalistic laws. Here's a quick overview of the laws. Formal laws include the logical law, which means that each person ought to be free from self-contradiction and be consistent in their intentions. Then there was the law of autonomy, which states that all persons ought to recognize themselves as obligated to choosing the ideals they acknowledge. The axiological laws were all persons ought to choose values that are self-consistent, harmonious, and coherent. All persons ought to will the very best possible in every situation, if possible, to improve every situation. All persons ought to choose a coherent life in which the broadest possible range of value is realized. And all persons should control their empirical values by ideal values. The last set of laws were what were called personalistic laws. The law of individualism. Every person ought to realize in his own experience the maximum value in which he is capable of living in harmony with moral law. And the law of altruism. Every person ought to respect all other persons as themselves and, as far as possible, to cooperate in the production and enjoyment of shared values. And finally, the law of personality. All persons ought to judge and guide their acts by their ideal conception, in harmony with the other laws, of what the whole person should become, individually and socially. UNESCO's Culture of Peace and Nonviolence. Utilizing the concepts of agape love and Brightman's moral values, Martin Luther King Jr. formulated his notions of the beloved community where the basic needs of every person are met. Though not called the beloved community, one of the United Nations educational, scientific, and cultural organization's goals is to create worldwide cultures of peace and nonviolence. Here is their definition. The culture of peace and nonviolence involves a holistic awareness of changing the world in which we live. It prompts us to reconsider the fundamental principles of humanity by highlighting what binds cultures and societies to each other and from within. In its essence, the culture of peace and nonviolence is a commitment to peace building, mediation, conflict prevention and resolution, peace education, human rights education for nonviolence, tolerance, acceptance, social cohesion, mutual respect, intercultural and interfaith dialogue, and reconciliation. It's a conceptual and normative framework engaged to instill a global consciousness and a firm disposition to dialogue. The culture of peace is a collective attempt to create paths of harmonious coexistence and gain the capacity to think about peace and order as dynamic forces of social, economic, and political life. As we conclude our discussion about why one should choose nonviolence over violence, we note that nonviolence is one of the few approaches that allow peace to live without fear. And by that we mean the fear of oppression, physical violence, or physical or mental harm by human behaviors and actions that demean the human condition. Today, we explain Dr. Martin Luther King's 6 Principles of Nonviolence and the preparation it takes to live them courageously. We introduced you to King's notion of the beloved community, a peacemaker's dream yet to be realized. The world owes a mighty debt of gratitude to Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for their impressive intellect, courage, and devotion to world peace. Our next podcast will discuss some of the ways peacemakers can practice nonviolent direct action. Thank you for joining us today. We encourage you to download a copy of the transcript of this program and use it to answer questions about the lesson.